self.
あれごめん。戻しちゃった。これぐらいだったかな。
The army and in the population at large. It was a time when states sought to maximize their wealth and power by increasing their efficiency. This was an age that saw the beginning of rational calculation of competitive advantage and efficiency and its application indeed to all areas of government operations and social organization, of what 2 millennia later would blossom and become mathematical management. This period was also a time when itinerant advisors, the philosophers and the sophists, traveled around from court to court, trying to sell their advice to rulers who were becoming...
これコートって彼言ってるのはあれですね。官費が法家だから。
increasingly anxious about the survival of their states. So the philosophers were kind of like external consultants. If you bought their policy prescriptions, you had to feed them.
プレスクリプション薬の処方箋。
A major school of such advisors were the Confucians.
メイシャスクール。メイジャーじゃない。メイシャスクール。
Confucius himself lived several centuries earlier, in the 5th century BCE, by all accounts, but already the decline of the Zhou was much in evidence. His prescriptions, I need to just go through them with you. His prescriptions for social ills and for good governance included the following, very briefly. First, return to the ways of the ancient sage kings and the founding rulers of the Zhou dynasty. Secondly, a political order in which the ruler manifested the virtue of benevolence and ruled by example, spreading his moral influence throughout the kingdom. Third, a social order in which the observance of ritual and propriety served as the social cement. Fourth, respect for social hierarchy, a hierarchy of primary social relationships centered on the family, such as father, son, elder brother, younger brother, and so on and so forth. Fifth, a personal ethic for educated people, so-called junzi or gentle persons, required them to act ethically regardless of the personal consequences and with no thought of future reward either in this life or in any hereafter. Sixthly,
これじゃあの世じゃなくて今後。
respect for learning and education regardless of social class. And finally, a cognitive order, that is a way of conceiving and being in the world, in which things in the outside world should be made to conform to their archetypes. Rulers should be
archetype 原型
rulers, fathers should be fathers, sons should be sons, and so forth and so on. In other words, people should conform to their ideal rules. The followers of Confucius, notably Mencius and Sun, further elaborated these ideas in the areas of statecraft. A great deal of the writings of Mencius, for example, are devoted to the question of how to make a state well-ordered, strong and secure. The Mencian solution to this puts the spotlight on the moral qualities of the ruler himself.
モーシュはモーラルクオリティーズ・オブ・ザ・ルール。まあどちらかというと道徳的なものを品質を彼ら求めて。
If the ruler acts ethically and exemplary.
だから、ruler acts ethically, exemplify. exemplify. これなんだっけ exemplify. 良い例となる。
Amplifies virtues such as benevolence, the people will support him and will be willing to act on his behalf. If not, not. most of the tribulations suffered by rulers
トリビュレーション、苦難、試練。もっと前。
come as a result of their not acting ethically and not looking after the livelihoods of their subjects. Now, such Confucian arguments are persuasive. Solidarity is indeed fostered
ソリダリティ、連帯、
by an ethical disposition that recognizes human
ディスポジション、性質、体質。
interconnectedness, benevolence, if you like. If it is the ruler who emanates this moral quality, the
エメネイト、感情が出る。道義的な品質が出てくる。エメネイト、現れる。
effect in society is far greater than if an ordinary person is good. However, this still leaves the problem of what to do with bad people. The Confucians divided human beings into two types: those who had some moral sense, the Junzi, and those who did not. The so-called
春図はそうじゃない。モラルセンスはない。
xiaoren, or little people.
シャオレン、シャオレン。
The little people were not physically small, but morally undeveloped or unteachable. An underclass of moral dwarves, as it were.
これドワーフのこと言ってドワーフ。商人。
Thought only of their immediate self-interest. Little people were always in the absolute majority in society, and the Confucian prescription, therefore, for good governance
コンフューシャンプレスクリプション、講師の処方箋。
was, of course, to let morally developed gentle people do the ruling. Most Confucians, oddly enough, had very
変なこと、妙なことなんですけども。
little to say about the little
ということは言ってない。
people.
小さな人、リトルピープルのことは言ってない。
Later Confucian philosopher Xunzi, who is famous
春図、純子。
for saying that human nature is originally bad, did at least try to address this question. In his view, it was through education that human beings who were born greedy and selfish
人間ボーングリーディ、貪欲で、セルフィッシュ、
would be brought up to become responsible, ethical members of society. If the benefits of education could be made more generally available in society, then the number of hardcore bad people
ハードコアってさっき言ったけど、僕知らなかったんだけど、これあれですよね、ここにハードコア、中学グループとか、信念を変えない人たち。
could eventually be minimized. This is all very well, but of course it leaves the immediate problem unsolved. This is in part where Han Fei and the legalists come in. Now, legalism has had a very bad press in the West and a very bad press
あんまり評判良くない、西側諸国で。
in China, and it's worth,
中国でも。
before we go on, to dwell on this for just a little bit. I'll give two examples. In the blurb, you would have noticed that I've said Han Fei has been called a fascist. This is true, and I'd better tell you where this comes from. It comes from the writings of Guo Moro, an eminent man of letters, who for a long period of time during the 1950s and 60s was held up as a literatus laureate by the Chinese Communist Party.
あ、ちょっと待ってね、これちょっともう一回。
I'll give two examples. In the blurb, you would have noticed that
ブラウって宣伝部。
I've said Han Fei has been called a fascist. This is true,
called fascist.
and I'd better tell you where this comes from. It comes from the writings of Guo Moro, an eminent man of letters, who for a
これ、ライティング、コモンオブローって言ってんじゃないかと思うんですけど。
long period of time during the 1950s and 60s was held up as a literatus laureate by the Chinese Communist Party. His words, therefore, carry considerable weight at
ヘアリーはさっきゾッとすると。
the time. What he said was, the essays of Han Fei, such as Five Vermin and Eminence
バイブちょっとわかんないけど、バーモントの害虫のような人。
in learning and the like, are entirely a fascist style theory. Now, Guo's argument was that Han Fei advocated concentrating power in the hands of the ruler of the feudal state, Führer, as it were, operating effectively what was a military dictatorship in which the masses were ground down under the weight of harsh and inflexible laws. Of course, Guo Moro could have had no quarrel.
コモンローヤーでコンゴルチってね、人の名前かな。
With the state monopoly on the means of production, since this has
ナポレオンってね。
always been Communist Party policy. Now, the other example comes, interestingly enough, from a textbook by John King Fairbank, the Harvard sinologist, who wrote The Great Tradition, East Asia, The Great Tradition, in 1958 and republished in 1960. A textbook familiar to generations of American undergraduate students. This is worth quoting. What Fairbank says is, right to the legalists consisted simply in what the ruler desired. And then it goes on. In recent years, the legalists have often been called totalitarians. The name might be full of
さっきからファシストとかトータリタリアンで言ってるね、彼の性格は。
justified if they had had the technical means of popular control and propaganda of their 20th century counterparts. In terms of their own day, they were like the modern totalitarians, conservatives and innovators at the same time. Simple acceptance of royal absolutism, society of strict
ロイヤルアブソルーティズム、絶対主義。
hierarchy, blah, blah, blah. And then the concept of law is one of the glories of Western civilization. But in China, legalism, although it profoundly influenced the attitude towards the law, has been a despised term for more than 2,000 years.
Despite ひどく嫌う、軽蔑する。
This is at least partly true. This is because the legalist concept of law fell far short of the Roman, whereas Western law has been conceived of as a human embodiment.
コンシーブと認知されているでだったかな。コンシーブ。認知されている。ヒューマンエンボードメント。具現化。Western law has been conceived. 認識されている。考えつく。さっき言ったね。心に考える。
Embodiment of some higher order of God or nature, the law of the legalists represented only the ruler's fiat. China developed little or no civil law to protect the citizen. Law remained largely administrative and penal, and so forth.
ピネロってなんだっけな。刑事制度。
Despite the condemnation of later ages, legalism left a lasting mark on Chinese civilization through the triumph of the Qin. One could say that the legalist spirit is more obviously alive in communist China today than either Confucian morality or Taoistic nature mysticism. Well, how times have changed. But this is quite an extraordinary concoction. It is under the
さっき言ったコンコクションってこうでっち上げる。
surface rather polemical and a serious
クリニカルって冷静な。
distortion of Han Fei's teaching.
ざめる。
Now, it cannot be the case that Fairbank did not have information at his disposal to make a more balanced judgment, and it seems likely that what happened is that he simply absorbed and developed further the Confucian biases of his Chinese teacher without turning things over and inquiring further. We'll be going on to look at some actual passages in the Han Fei which directly contradict this very bleak assessment. Now,
ブリーク喜べない評価。
I'm not going to say very much about the biography of Han Fei. What there is available in the most the most reliable form is confined to what is said in the records of Sima Qian, and it can fit on a single page. Basically, Han Feizi was the scion of the Han royal family.
サヨン子孫
or princely family. He studied the philosophies of the Yellow Emperor and Lao Tzu when he was young. He served as a minister in the Han and for many years tried to get his advice taken very much in vain. His writings have
これインベインって無駄なって言うんだけど、言語関係でよくわかんなかったんで聞いたんですけど。その後の言葉がよくなんだかわかんない。だから、try to get his advice taken very much 無駄なアドバイスを受けた。his writing ってちょっとわかんない。
however came to the attention of in vain. His writings, however, came to the attention of the Qin state. This is just before the Qin state unified China, and the chief minister Li Si advised that Han Fei be invited to visit the court of the Qin. And that is where he met his death. At the hands of Li Si and the man who later became the first emperor of Qin. The work of Han Fei, usually known just by the name Han Feizi, is one of the largest bodies of
こ
philosophical
れ
writing
若くして死んだんですよね、確か。30ぐらいは死んない。
that's come down to us from the classical period in China.
久しぶり
It's comprised 55 chapters in the current version in 20 fascicles or juan, and it has a total length of something
ファシクルって小冊子。
like 100,000 characters. This is actually quite a large work. With all the chapters taken together, it can be considered the equivalent of a complete treatise on statecraft.
このトリタイズは論文ですね。
For some of the chapters, there are questions of authorship, not serious. It seems that some chapters did not reach their final version, their final form until after Han Fei's death. Nevertheless, compared with the problems that beset other major works of the classical
ビセットって悩まされる。ミステリー。これはミステリーですね。
periods such as the Analects of Confucius or the Zhuangzi, these problems are very minor. At that time anyway, authorship was regarded in a different way from the way we regard it now. It was less of a matter of individual copyright and more of a collective creation by the philosophical school. Now, for the English reader, there's a translation by Burton Watson, first published in the 1960s, recently reissued, covering 12 of the 55 chapters. And there is an older, complete translation into English done by W.K. Liao and published in 1959. The translation by Watson is smoother and more contemporary, but both are equally good as guides to the Chinese original text. The Chinese original text, by the way, is much more elegant than either of the translations. Now, in this work, Han Fei covers not only the art of rulership, with advice to the ruler, but also the art of effective advocacy as a minister or as an advisor. Overall, we can roughly classify the chapters under the following topic areas: the way of the ruler, the way of the advisor, the law, and vermin and tigers. I will deal with most of these topics in what follows.